They said I had the worst voice in the choir, but what they truly wanted to silence was my very existence. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I never thought my life's greatest humiliation would come from the place I'd always felt most at home. For 35 years, I had been a steadfast member of St. Mark's Easter Choir in our small town of Oak Creek. It had become my sanctuary, especially after losing Rosalind, my rock, my beloved wife of 40 years. The choir was my constant in a world that had suddenly become unstable. That Tuesday morning began just like any other. A crisp spring breeze rustled the newly bloomed dogwood trees as I walked into the church basement for our weekly rehearsal. My sheet music was tucked neatly into its folder, a comforting weight in my hands. The familiar scene greeted me. The friendly faces of my fellow singers, the aroma of coffee brewing in the corner percolator, the mismatched chairs arranged in a familiar semicircle. This was more than a choir. This was my community, the family that had wrapped its arms around me when I needed them the most. And then I saw it. The updated choir roster was pinned to the main bulletin board. A small crowd had already gathered around it, buzzing with anticipation and checking their positions for the upcoming Easter Sunday television broadcast. It was a big deal for Oak Creek. I waited my turn patiently, a small, confident smile on my face. I'd always been a reliable baritone. Nothing spectacular, but steady. Dependable Arthur Marshall. That's what Pastor Evans always called me. When I finally reached the board, my finger traced the familiar column of names, searching for my own between Miller, Elizabeth, and Peterson James. But it wasn't there. My heart stuttered, a sudden cold panic seizing my chest. It had to be a mistake. I scanned the list again, more slowly this time, my eyes meticulously checking each line. That's when I saw it, scrawled at the very bottom in my son-in-law Victor's sharp, unmistakable script. Removed. Worst voice in the choir. The cheerful chatter in the room seemed to die away, replaced by an oppressive silence. I could feel the weight of their gazes on my back, a painful mixture of pity and awkward discomfort. My son-in-law, Victor, our choir's ambitious new coordinator since January, stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, a flicker of a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "It's nothing personal, Arthur," he announced, his voice carrying with deliberate clarity across the now silent room. "We simply have standards to maintain for the television broadcast." My cheeks burned with a heat that felt like a brand. 35 years of unwavering dedication, of weekly rehearsals and Sunday services, all of it reduced to a cruel public mockery. I clutched my music folder tighter, my knuckles turning white, desperately willing the tears welling in my eyes not to fall. Not here, not in front of all of them. I understand, I managed to whisper, though I didn't understand at all. My voice had always been reliable. Had my grief for Rosalind somehow warped my singing without me even realizing it? Victor approached me, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt less like comfort and more like a conqueror claiming his victory. "You're more than welcome to help with refreshments on Easter Sunday," he offered, his voice dripping with a false saccharine sympathy that made my stomach turn. I could only nod mechanically, turning to leave as the whispers erupted behind me. Outside, the brilliant spring sunshine felt like a cruel mockery of the profound darkness that was spreading like a cancer inside me. 2 days later, the humiliation deepened at the town hall meeting. Mayor Richardson was discussing the upcoming Easter festivities, which were meant to put our little town on the map. The regional television broadcast was expected to bring new attention to Oak Creek, potentially attracting tourism and business investments. "We've had to make some necessary changes to ensure the highest quality," he announced, his gaze flicking toward Victor, who sat beaming in the front row, particularly with the Street Marks Easter Choir, which will be the centerpiece of our broadcast. Then his eyes found me, sitting alone in the back row. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. Sentimentality cannot be allowed to compromise excellence when the reputation of our entire town is on the line. A palpable chill ran through the room. Everyone knew who and what he was talking about. My personal humiliation was now a matter of public record, officially endorsed by the highest authority in our community. I walked home alone that evening, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows. The true magnitude of what had transpired began to sink in. This wasn't just about a spot in the choir. This felt like the first move in some larger, more sinister game. Victor had always been cold and distant toward me, but this calculated, public shaming felt different, more strategic. Since Rosalind's passing 6 months ago, Victor had been systematically inserting himself into every aspect of our family's decisions, persistent questions about the will, subtle suggestions that our house was too much for me to manage alone, pointed comments to my daughter, Jessica, about my supposed forgetfulness. Entering my empty house, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked smaller, somehow diminished. The man staring back wasn't the Arthur Marshall who had taught history at Northwood High for 3 decades, who had raised a wonderful daughter, who had built a life with Rosalind that was the quiet envy of many in Oak Creek. This man looked utterly defeated. I made my way to the piano in the living room, Rosalind's pride and joy. My fingers trembled as I played a simple C major scale and hummed along with the notes. My voice sounded just as it always had, perhaps a little rough from unshed tears, but certainly not the worst in the choir. The sharp ring of the telephone startled me. It was Martin from next door, my oldest friend in town and a former opera singer of some renown. "Arthur," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "I just heard what happened. That man is a viper. You're coming for coffee tomorrow, and we are going to sort this out." As I hung up, my eyes fell on a legal pad Victor had left during his last visit. I saw his handwriting again, notes about the house, about Rosalind's investments, about family heirlooms he thought should stay in the family rather than with me. And suddenly, with a sickening clarity, I understood. This was never about my voice. The choir was just the opening act. Victor wanted me gone from the choir, from this house, from my daughter's life. And he was more than willing to destroy my reputation and my spirit to achieve his goal. I sat down at the piano again, my fingers finding the keys with a newfound purpose. This time when I sang, my voice didn't waver. They had taken my name off a list and labeled me the worst voice in the choir. But they had no idea what I was capable of when I was backed into a corner. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Martin's home felt like stepping into another era, a time before my world had collapsed not once but twice over. First, with Rosalind's death, and now with this calculated public degradation. His living room was a museum of his days on the European opera circuit. Signed playbills, ornate music boxes, and photographs with world-renowned maestros. They did what? Martin's voice, even in his late 70s, could still hit a perfect tenor's ringing tone when he was incensed. He remained a formidable figure. His silver hair swept back immaculately, his posture better than men half his age. I recounted the story again, each word still feeling like a coal burning my throat. "Worst voice in the choir," Martin scoffed, placing his coffee mug down with enough force to threaten the delicate porcelain. "Ridiculous. I've listened to you sing for decades, Arthur. You are the backbone of that choir's baritone section." Victor, has everyone convinced I've lost my touch? I replied, staring into the dark swirls of my coffee. Maybe the grief has affected my voice. Maybe I just haven't noticed. Martin silenced me with a look that had once intimidated directors at La Scala. Stand up, he commanded. Martin, please. Up. He was already moving toward his baby grand piano. We'll settle this nonsense right now. Reluctantly, I rose to my feet as Martin played a simple warm-up scale. I followed with my voice, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as Martin nodded in approval. After 20 minutes of vocal exercises and an aria from his old teaching days, Martin closed the piano lid with a decisive thud. Just as I suspected. Your voice is richer than it was before, Arthur. Grief has given it a new depth, an emotional resonance. You're singing better than you ever have. A small weight lifted from my shoulders, but the confusion lingered. Then why would Victor? A knock at the front door interrupted my thought. Martin excused himself, returning a moment later with my daughter Jessica. My heart soared at the sight of her, only to plummet when I saw the troubled look on her face. Dad, she began hesitantly, Victor told me what happened with the choir. Jessica, I don't know what's happening. One day I'm in the choir, the next I'm being publicly humiliated. He's worried about you, she interrupted, her eyes avoiding mine. He thinks maybe you're not coping well since Mom died. My blood ran cold. Not coping well? Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Victor thinks you might be having some cognitive issues. He says you've been forgetting things, making mistakes in the choir. He's just concerned. From across the room, Martin made a sound that polite society would call a scoff. And you believe him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to believe, Dad. Victor says you've been making financial decisions Mom wouldn't have approved of. He mentioned the house maintenance is slipping, that maybe it's all becoming too much for you now. I stared at my daughter, this stranger who wore Jessica's face. I have made no financial decisions without consulting Mr. Bennett, your mother's attorney. The house is in perfect condition. You can see that for yourself. Victor thinks quite a lot, doesn't he? Martin interjected sharply. Perhaps Victor should think about minding his own damn business. After Jessica left, promising to check on me more regularly, Martin and I sat in a stunned, heavy silence. This isn't about the choir, I finally said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. No, my friend, Martin replied softly. I don't believe it, Island. The next morning, I drove to the safety deposit box at Oak Creek Savings and Loan. Rosalind had always been meticulous about our affairs. Inside the cold metal box, I found our will, our insurance policies, and a letter addressed to me in her familiar, elegant handwriting. Arthur, my love, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I've arranged everything to provide for you, with the house and investments solely in your name. Provide for Jessica, of course. But remember what we discussed about Victor. His spending habits worry me. The money comes to him only after you're gone, and only in the trusts we established for the grandchildren's education. All my love, Rosalind. I sat in the bank's stark, private room, holding the letter that felt like a message from beyond the grave. So, Victor knew about the inheritance structure. My removal from the choir wasn't the beginning of his campaign. It was just the first public move. Back at home, I started noticing things I had previously overlooked. The way Victor had been subtly rearranging furniture during his visits, commenting on which pieces should go to Jessica someday. How he'd been quietly cataloging our possessions, asking insidious questions about my medications, my sleep patterns, and memory problems that didn't even exist. He was building a case, brick by brick, that I was incompetent. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. 3 choir members, Eleanor, Thomas, and Diana, friends for over 20 years, stood awkwardly on my porch. "We just wanted to see how you are, Arthur," Eleanor began uncertainly. "I'm fine, though apparently I have the worst voice in the choir," I replied, unable to keep the bitter edge from my voice. They exchanged uneasy glances. Thomas cleared his throat. "Arthur, we were all shocked by Victor's decision. It wasn't put to a vote like these things usually are." "What do you mean?" "He simply announced the changes at a coordinators meeting," Diana explained. "When Sarah questioned him about removing you, Victor said you'd been struggling, missing notes, and that your mental health might be affecting your reliability." My mental health. The pieces of the puzzle clicked further into place. "We've been trying to rehearse the Easter program," Thomas added, "and without your baritone, the balance is all off in the Bernard piece. Victor keeps trying to adjust the arrangement, but it just doesn't work." As they left, promising to stay in touch, I immediately called Martin. "We were right," I told him, my voice now shaking with anger instead of fear. "Victor is trying to paint me as mentally unstable. He wants control of Rosalind's estate. Then we'll just have to prove him wrong, won't we?" Martin replied, his voice firm. "Starting with that magnificent voice of yours." That night, sleep was impossible. I went downstairs to Rosalind's study, a room I had mostly avoided since her death. Her presence felt strongest here, surrounded by her books and records. I opened her desk drawer and found her old tape recorder, the one she'd used for choir practice when she'd missed rehearsals. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. Rosalind's voice filled the room, strong and clear, directing the choir through last year's Easter program. And there, in the background, was the baritone section, my voice, steady and true, hitting every single note perfectly. I sat in Rosalind's chair until the first light of dawn, listening to recording after recording, years of irrefutable evidence of my musical competence. Years of memories with the very community that had now, it seemed, turned its back on me. By morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. Victor had declared war with his campaign of public humiliation. It was time for me to fight back. "Take a deep breath, right from the diaphragm," Martin instructed, his hand pressed firmly against my abdomen. "Support the note from here, not from your throat." For 2 solid weeks, Martin's living room had become both my sanctuary and my training ground. Each morning, after the latest rumor from Victor about my deteriorating condition reached me through the concerned whispers of neighbors, I would arrive on Martin's doorstep, more determined than ever to reclaim what had been stolen from me. "Again?" Martin demanded, striking a powerful chord on his piano. "This time with intention, Arthur. Sing like you mean it." I drew a deep, grounding breath and let the note flow out, surprised myself by the richness and power that emerged. Grief had indeed transformed my voice, but not in the way Victor had claimed. There was a new depth there, an emotional texture that hadn't existed before. "Magnificent," Martin nodded, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Rosalind would be so proud. The mention of her name no longer brought an immediate sting of tears, but a bittersweet warmth. She always believed in me more than I believed in myself. "As she should have," Martin replied, closing his music book. "Now tell me about yesterday's choir rehearsal. What did your spies report?" I smiled at his dramatic choice of words. Thomas had been calling me after each rehearsal, providing a detailed account of the choir's progress or lack thereof. "The Bernard piece is still giving them trouble." Victor moved Eleanor to the baritone section. but she's struggling with the lower register. I couldn't help but feel a small, sharp sense of satisfaction. Thomas says Victor is getting more and more frustrated with each practice. Martin's eyes sparkled with mischievous delight. Good. Let him stew in his own incompetence. As we sipped our coffee, Martin studied me over the rim of his cup. You're stronger now, Arthur. I can see it in your posture. I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. I'm done feeling sorry for myself. Victor wants my house, my daughter's trust, maybe even my dignity. But I'll be damned if I let him take any of it without a fight. That's the spirit, Martin declared. Now, about Easter Sunday. You heard the mayor's announcement yesterday about the broadcast? I had. Mayor Richardson had proudly announced that a group of potential investors from the state capitol would be attending the Easter service, specifically to hear our renowned choir. The pressure on Victor was mounting. It's the perfect opportunity, Martin said, a strategic glint in his eye. If Victor fails to deliver a flawless performance. The doorbell rang, interrupting him. Martin excused himself and returned a moment later with Jessica, who looked deeply uncomfortable. Dad, she began hesitantly, I just wanted to check on how you're doing. I'm doing wonderfully, Jessica. Martin has been helping me with my singing. Jessica shifted nervously. Victor mentioned that you've been fixated on the choir situation. He's worried it's not healthy for you. A flash of hot anger surged through me, but I kept my voice perfectly steady. Is that what Victor thinks? That I'm fixated? He found the old choir recordings in Mom's study. Said you've been playing them over and over again. They're my memories, Jessica. Your mother's voice is on those tapes. She looked pained. I know, Dad. It's just... Victor thinks maybe the house is affecting you. Too many memories. The ugly implication hung in the air between us. Victor thinks I should sell the house, I stated flatly. Jessica wouldn't meet my eyes. He thinks a smaller place might be easier for you to manage, less stressful. And what do you think, Jessica? I asked, my heart breaking at how easily my daughter had been manipulated by her husband. I just want what's best for you, Dad, she mumbled. After she left, Martin handed me a glass of something much stronger than coffee. That man is a piece of work, he said grimly. He's turning my own daughter against me. I whispered, the reality of it hitting me with full force. Then we need evidence, Martin declared, his voice resolute. Concrete, undeniable proof of his manipulations. The next day, I visited the church office under the guise of donating flower arrangements for the Easter service. Pastor Evans was delighted to see me. Arthur, we've missed you at choir practice. I've missed being there, I replied carefully. I understand the Easter program is coming along nicely. His smile faltered just slightly. Well, we've certainly had some challenges. Victor has made some significant changes to the traditional program. Changes? I prompted gently. He's removed some of the classic pieces. The Bernard composition, especially, has been difficult without your baritone section. I nodded sympathetically. I have recordings of last year's Easter program. Rosalind made them during rehearsals. They might be helpful. The pastor's eyes lit up. That would be tremendous, Arthur. As I left with a promise to bring the recordings, I saw Victor entering the church office. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and his narrowed with suspicion. I offered him a pleasant smile and continued on my way. Back home, I began searching for the documents Rosalind had mentioned in her letter. In her study, tucked away behind a treasured collection of first edition novels, I found a manila envelope labeled simply, Financials, Victor. Inside were credit card statements, loan applications, and a detailed report from a private investigator. It turned out that Victor had a serious gambling problem and was carrying substantial debt when he had married my Jessica. Rosalind, ever protective of our daughter, had been quietly monitoring Victor's spending habits for years. The most damning piece of evidence was a recent document. Victor had made a formal inquiry about accessing Jessica's trust fund, the very one Rosalind had established, with the strict provision that neither Jessica nor Victor could touch it until their children reached college age. I sat at Rosalind's desk, the sickening evidence spread out before me. Victor wasn't just after my choir position or my house. He needed money, a lot of it, and he needed it quickly. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Thomas from the choir. "Arthur," he said, his voice urgent, "you need to come to the church." Victor's completely rearranged the Easter program. The Bernard piece is out entirely. The mayor is furious. He specifically promised it to the investors. "Why would he remove our signature piece?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because without you, we can't perform it properly," Thomas replied. "But Arthur, there's more. Victor told the mayor that your mental health is deteriorating rapidly. He actually suggested you might need a professional evaluation." My hand tightened around the phone. Did he now? Everyone's uncomfortable with how he's handling this. Some of us are thinking of approaching Pastor Evans. "Not yet," I said, a clear plan beginning to form in my mind. "Tell me, is the retirement home performance still scheduled for tomorrow?" "Yes, but Victor is threatening to cancel it. Says the choir isn't ready." "Make sure it happens, Thomas. I'll be there, in the audience." As I hung up, I looked at the pile of evidence in front of me, then at the piano where Rosalind and I had spent countless evenings together. My voice hadn't failed. My mind wasn't slipping. And Victor had severely underestimated what a man with nothing left to lose was capable of. Tomorrow would be just the beginning. The Sunshine Valley retirement home smelled of antiseptic and potpourri, a combination that brought back a flood of memories of visiting my own mother in her final years. As Martin and I found seats near the back of the common room, I saw several choir members arranging themselves nervously on a set of makeshift risers. "Victor's not here yet," Martin whispered, scanning the room. "Good." The elderly residents filled the chairs in front of us, many accompanied by caregivers. These performances were highlights in their often monotonous days. I recognized several faces. Former students, the parents of colleagues, old neighbors who had moved here when maintaining their homes became too difficult. Thomas caught my eye from the risers and gave a subtle, conspiratorial nod. The plan was in motion. Pastor Evans was just stepping forward to introduce the choir when the door burst open and Victor swept in, his face flushed with anger. "I specifically said we weren't ready for this," he hissed, loud enough for the entire front row to hear. Pastor Evans maintained his calm, benevolent smile. "These good people have been looking forward to our visit for weeks, Victor. We can't possibly disappoint them." Victor's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on me. His eyes narrowed for a split second before he quickly looked away, likely hoping I hadn't noticed his flicker of recognition. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "We'll do the abbreviated program." The performance began with a few traditional hymns. Even from the back of the room, I could hear the struggle in the baritone section. During the third song, the challenging Bernard piece they'd retained for this audience but planned to cut from the main Easter service, the section faltered completely, their voices trailing off in confused disarray. Victor, attempting to direct while shooting daggers at Thomas, grew visibly flustered. The entire performance was disintegrating before our very eyes. Martin squeezed my hand. "Now," he whispered. I stood up and quietly made my way toward the side of the risers. Several choir members saw me, their expressions immediately brightening with relief. When the song ended in an awkward, disjointed cadence, only scattered, polite applause filled the room. Before Victor could announce the next piece, Eleanor stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been struggling a bit without our beloved baritone section leader, Arthur Marshall, but I see he's with us today." She extended her hand toward me. "Arthur, would you please help us with the next piece? For old time's sake?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Victor spun around, his face a mask of pure fury when he saw me approaching the risers. "This is completely inappropriate," he hissed. "Arthur is no longer—" "Oh, let him sing," called out Mr. Abernathy from the front row, a formidable man of 90 who had taught both me and Victor in high school. "I came specifically to hear Arthur's baritone. Been listening to it for 30 years at Street Marks." Trapped by the clear expectation of the audience, Victor had no choice but to step aside as I took my familiar place in the baritone section. A comforting weight of belonging settled over me as I stood among my friends once more. We began the Bernard piece again. This time, my voice provided the solid foundation the others needed, guiding them confidently through the complex harmonies. I felt a power building inside me, a certainty that had been missing since Rosalind's death. When we finished, the applause was thunderous by retirement home standards. Mr. Abernathy even got to his feet, his gnarled hands clapping with surprising vigor. "That's more like it," he declared loudly. "Now that's the Street Marks choir I know." Victor's face was a storm cloud of rage. As the applause continued, someone in the back of the room started recording with their phone, and then another joined in. In our small town, I knew this would be all over social media within the hour. After the performance, several residents came up to hug me, to tell me how much they had missed my voice in the community. I caught sight of Victor in a heated conversation with Pastor Evans, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. Martin appeared at my side, grinning like a Cheshire cat. "Well done, my dear friend. Did you see his face when you hit that low E perfectly? Priceless." On our way out, Thomas intercepted us. "Arthur, that was magnificent. Several of us are meeting tonight to discuss the situation with Victor. We'd like you to join us." "I'd be honored," I replied, a newfound confidence flowing through me. When I arrived home, I was surprised to find Jessica's car parked in the driveway. Inside, she was sitting at the kitchen table staring intently at her phone. "Dad," she said, looking up, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion. "I just saw a video of you singing at Sunshine Valley. You were amazing." "Thank you," I replied cautiously. "Victor told me your voice had deteriorated badly, that you were embarrassing yourself in the choir." I sat down across from her. "And now you know that isn't true." She nodded slowly. "Mr. Finch called me today, too." My heart skipped a beat. Albert Finch had been Rosalind's closest friend and my golf partner for decades. What did he say? "He said I should ask you about Mom's private investigation into Victor before I make any decisions about the house." Her eyes finally met mine, filled with questions. "What investigation, Dad?" I took a deep breath. "Your mother had concerns about Victor's financial situation. She hired someone to look into it before she died." Jessica's face paled. "What kind of concerns?" I retrieved the manila envelope from Rosalind's study and placed it on the table in front of my daughter. "See for yourself." As Jessica read through the documents, her expression shifted from disbelief to anger and finally to a profound, heartbreaking sadness. "He's been lying to me," she whispered. "About everything." "I'm so sorry, Jessica." She looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "He told me you were becoming paranoid, that you were inventing conflicts where there weren't any." She shook her head in disbelief. I believed him over my own father. He's very convincing, I said gently. He asked me to talk to Mr. Bennett yesterday about having you psychologically evaluated. Her voice broke on the last word. He said it would be for your own protection. The full, chilling weight of Victor's scheme became terrifyingly clear. If he could have me declared legally incompetent, control of Rosalind's estate would revert to Jessica, whom he could easily manipulate. What are you going to do? I asked her quietly. Jessica squared her shoulders, looking so much like her mother in that moment that my heart ached. First, I'm going to apologize to you properly, she said, taking my hands in hers. Then, I'm going to have a very long conversation with my husband. After Jessica left, I called Martin to update him. The tide is turning, he said. But Victor won't go down without a fight. I's counting on it, I replied, because this time I'm ready for him. That evening, as I prepared to meet with the other choir members, I received a text from Thomas. Emergency choir meeting called by Victor tomorrow. Full attendance required. Rumor is he's canceling the Easter performance entirely. Mayor's furious. I smiled. Victor was panicking, making rash, desperate decisions, and in doing so, he was playing right into my hands. For the first time since they had removed my name from the list and labeled me the worst voice in the choir, I felt truly powerful. Victor had tried to diminish me, to erase me. Instead, he had awakened something stronger than he could have ever possibly anticipated. Easter Sunday was fast approaching, and with it, my own resurrection. Streetmark's fellowship hall buzzed with a palpable tension when I arrived with Martin by my side. The emergency choir meeting called by Victor had drawn not just the choir members, but also Pastor Evans, several of the church elders, and most surprisingly, Mayor Richardson himself. Arthur, Thomas whispered as he intercepted us at the door. Victor's on the warpath. He's threatening to cancel the Easter performance entirely. On what grounds? Martin asked, his voice carrying just enough to turn several heads in our direction. He claims the choir isn't prepared, Thomas replied grimly. But everyone knows it's because the Sunshine Valley performance went viral. Indeed, Mr. Abernathy's nephew had posted the video online, where it had been shared and reshared throughout Oak Creek's tight-knit community. The comments were overwhelmingly positive about my voice and the choir's triumphant performance, but scathing about my initial removal. Victor stood at the front of the room, his perfectly manicured hands gripping a clipboard so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. When he spotted me, his expression hardened into something truly ugly. This is a closed meeting for current choir members only, he announced pointedly. I invited Arthur, Pastor Evans stated calmly, moving to stand right beside me. As the situation directly concerns him. Victor's smile was brittle. With all due respect, Pastor, Arthur's removal from the choir was a necessary musical decision. A decision you made unilaterally, Eleanor spoke up from her seat, without consulting a single one of us. I am the choir coordinator, Victor snapped. The musical quality of this choir is my responsibility. Mayor Richardson cleared his throat loudly, and yet, the recording from Sunshine Valley suggests Mr. Marshall's voice is quite exceptional. I must admit, I find myself confused about the entire situation, Mr. Crawford. Victor flushed a deep red. One adequate performance doesn't negate weeks of inconsistency. What inconsistency? Thomas challenged. Arthur has been our most reliable baritone for decades. You haven't heard him in private rehearsals, Victor countered, his voice dripping with false concern. His voice has been deteriorating for months. Rosalind's death affected him more deeply than anyone realizes. The room fell silent at the mention of my late wife. Victor saw his advantage and pressed on. Arthur has been struggling with his grief. It's affected his memory, his reliability. Just ask his daughter. She's deeply concerned about his mental state. I felt a surge of pure anger, but before I could respond, the fellowship hall door swung open. Jessica stepped inside, her face set in grim determination. "Actually," she said, her voice ringing out loud and clear, "I'm not concerned about my father's mental state. I'm concerned about my husband's honesty." Victor went deathly pale. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" "Supporting my father," she replied, moving to stand on my other side. Something I should have been doing from the very beginning. The room erupted in murmurs. Victor's gaze darted between Jessica and me, raw calculation evident in his eyes. "This is inappropriate," he managed to say. "We're here to discuss choir business." "Are we?" Mayor Richardson interjected. "Because it sounds to me like you're making serious accusations about Arthur's mental health, which strikes me as being far beyond a choir coordinator's purview." Victor's composure finally cracked. "I'm only concerned about the Easter broadcast. The investors, the mayor interrupted coolly, were particularly looking forward to hearing the Bernard piece that your choir performed so beautifully at Sunshine Valley once Arthur rejoined you." Victor's eyes narrowed. "We can't reinstate someone based on pure sentiment. This choir has standards that Arthur far exceeds," Martin declared loudly from his seat. "As an operatic professional, I can personally attest that his voice is stronger and more resonant than ever." Victor let out a hollow laugh. An elderly man vouching for his elderly friend, hardly an objective assessment. A collective gasp went through the room at the blatant insult. Martin drew himself up to his full height, every inch the diva who had once commanded international stages. "I performed at La Scala for longer than you've been alive, young man. I know talent when I hear it." Pastor Evans stepped forward, his gentle manner belying the steel in his voice. "Victor, I believe we should put this to a vote. The choir has always been a democratic institution." "A vote?" Victor's voice rose in disbelief. "This isn't a popularity contest." "No," Jessica said quietly but firmly. "It's about the truth. And the truth is, you removed my father from this choir for personal reasons that had nothing to do with his voice." Victor turned on her, desperation flashing in his eyes. "Jessica, you don't understand what's happening here." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she replied, her voice cold as ice. "I've seen the financial reports, Victor. Dad knows all about your gambling debts." The room went deadly silent. Victor looked as though he'd been physically slapped. "How dare you bring our private matters into this?" he hissed. "You made it public when you publicly humiliated my father in an attempt to gain control of our family's assets," Jessica responded, her voice unwavering. "Is this true, Victor?" Pastor Evans asked, his expression deeply troubled. Victor's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route, and finding none. He straightened his shoulders defiantly. "Fine, take your vote. Reinstate Arthur if you must. But I refuse to direct a choir that ignores basic musical standards out of pure sentimentality." He stared directly at me, a final desperate gambit. "Without a director, you have no Easter performance." "Actually," Thomas said, stepping forward, "the choir constitution clearly states that in the absence of a director, leadership reverts to the most senior choir member." All eyes in the room turned to me. "That would be Arthur," Eleanor confirmed with a smile. Victor laughed, but there was an unmistakable edge of hysteria to the sound. "You can't be serious. He doesn't have the experience." "He has 35 years of experience," Martin cut in. "And he has something you lack entirely, Victor, the respect of his peers." Pastor Evans nodded thoughtfully. "It seems we have our solution." He raised his voice. all in favor of reinstating Arthur Marshall to the choir and appointing him as interim director. Please raise your hands. The vote was unanimous, excluding Victor, who stood rigid with fury. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "You're all making a mistake you will regret on Easter morning." He stormed out of the hall, slamming the door behind him and leaving a charged silence in his wake. Mayor Richardson approached me, extending his hand. "It seems you have quite a challenge ahead of you, Mr. Marshall. Easter is only 3 days away." I took his hand, feeling a strange and powerful calm settle over me. "We'll be ready, Mayor. The Bernard piece will be the centerpiece, just as tradition dictates." As the meeting disbanded, Jessica pulled me aside, her expression pained. "Dad, I am so sorry. I should have seen what was happening." "You saw what he wanted you to see," I told her gently. "It's not your fault." What happens now?" she asked. I looked around at the choir members gathering their music, at Martin beaming proudly, at the community that had so powerfully rallied behind me. "Now," I said with a confidence I hadn't felt since Rosalind died, "we prepare for Easter." I met my daughter's troubled eyes, and after that, you and Victor have some very difficult conversations ahead. As we left the church, Martin linked his arm through mine. "You know he's not done yet," he warned. "Victor will make one more desperate move before Easter." "I'm counting on it," I replied, surprising myself with how little fear I felt. "But this time, I'll be ready." Easter morning dawned with a crystalline clarity that seemed almost deliberate, as if the heavens themselves were setting the stage for the day's events. I stood in my bedroom, smoothing the lapels of a navy blue suit, Rosalind's favorite. She always said it brought out the silver in my hair. "You would have loved this," I whispered to her photograph on the dresser. "Your practical, predictable husband, leading a full-blown rebellion at 62. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of emergency rehearsals, hastily revised arrangements, and an outpouring of community support that I could have never imagined. Even choir members, who had initially stayed silent during my removal, had rallied around me, fiercely determined to make our Easter performance unforgettable. Victor, meanwhile, had been ominously silent. Jessica reported that he'd hardly been home, coming in late and leaving early, stonewalling any attempt at a meaningful conversation. Martin's warning echoed in my mind. Victor will make one final desperate move. As I drove to the church for our pre-service rehearsal, I braced myself for whatever that might be. The church parking lot was already filling up with early attendees and choir members when I arrived. Thomas met me at the side entrance, his face a tight mask of excitement and anxiety. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "The sheet music for the Bernard piece is missing." My stomach tightened into a cold knot. "All of the copies?" He nodded grimly. "Every single one. The master copies from the file cabinet. Everyone's individual folders. They're all gone." "Victor," I said flatly. It wasn't a question. That would be my guess. I took a deep, steadying breath, refusing to let panic set in. "It's okay. We know this piece by heart. We've been singing it for years. We don't need the sheet music." "We can do this, Thomas," I assured him, projecting far more confidence than I actually felt. "Gather everyone in the choir room, now." The choir room buzzed with nervous tension when I entered. 20 anxious faces turned toward me, seeking a reassurance I wasn't entirely sure I could provide. "As you've probably all heard by now, our sheet music has gone missing," I began, forcing my voice to remain calm and steady. "This is our final challenge, but it will not defeat us." "But Arthur," Eleanor spoke up, her voice trembling slightly, "some of our newer members don't know the Bernard piece completely by memory." "Then those of us who do will guide them," I replied firmly. We will perform it as we have always done together, supporting each other through every single measure. I saw worried expressions slowly give way to looks of sheer determination. For the next hour, we worked through the entire piece from memory, line by line. Those who knew it well paired up with those who needed assistance, humming parts, quietly singing cues. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was collaborative, and it was surprisingly powerful. As service time approached, we took our places in the loft behind the sanctuary. Through the doorway, I could see the church was filled to capacity. Pastor Evans had mentioned that the recent controversy had actually increased attendance. Nothing drew a crowd in Oak Creek like the promise of potential drama. The mayor sat in the front row with 3 distinguished-looking visitors, the investors, presumably. And there, in the 3rd row, sat Victor, his face a mask of smug, malicious anticipation. Pastor Evans approached me, his expression concerned. "Arthur, is everything all right? I heard about the missing music." "Everything is fine, Pastor," I assured him. "The choir is ready." His eyes searched mine. "Are you certain? There would be no shame in simplifying the program, given the circumstances. This choir has been the backbone of Street Mark's Easter celebration for 50 years, I said firmly. "We will not falter now." He nodded, patting my shoulder before moving to the pulpit to begin the service. The first hymns went smoothly, our voices blending in the familiar, joyous greeting of Easter morning. With each successful piece, the choir's confidence visibly grew. When it came time for the Bernard piece, our centerpiece, I gave the starting pitch and a reassuring nod to my fellow singers. The opening notes rose, clear and pure, into the sanctuary's vaulted ceiling. We moved through the complex harmonies entirely from memory, each section supporting the others, listening intently to one another. When we reached the difficult middle passage, I heard a moment of hesitation from the newer members. Maintaining direct eye contact, I guided them through with subtle hand gestures and an unwavering vocal support. As the final, triumphant notes of the piece faded away, a profound silence fell over the entire sanctuary. It was that magical moment when music touches something deeper than mere appreciation. Then, the applause erupted, startling in a church setting, but somehow completely appropriate. I risked a glance at Victor. His face had gone completely slack with disbelief. This was not the catastrophic failure he had so carefully orchestrated. The mayor leaned toward his guests, nodding with evident satisfaction. When the service concluded, Pastor Evans asked the choir to remain at the front. The congregation, sensing something significant was about to happen, stayed in their seats. "Today," Pastor Evans began, "we witnessed not just a celebration of Easter, but a powerful testament to perseverance and community spirit. Our choir faced some unexpected challenges this morning." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the congregation. Their sheet music mysteriously disappeared just before the service. A shocked murmur ran through the church. All eyes instinctively turned toward Victor, who suddenly became very interested in the contents of his hymnal. Yet, under Arthur Marshall's leadership, they delivered one of the most moving performances in the history of Street Marks. "Sometimes," he continued, "we find a strength we never knew we had when we are faced with true adversity." Mayor Richardson approached the pulpit, whispering something to the pastor, who nodded and stepped aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, "our special guests from the State Arts Council were deeply impressed by today's performance. I am thrilled to announce that they have approved our application for a substantial grant to establish a community music program right here in Oak Creek." He turned to me, and, They have specifically requested that Arthur Marshall serve as the program's inaugural director. The applause was thunderous. As it died down, the mayor continued. Furthermore, in recognition of his 35 years of dedicated service to our community, I am honored to present Arthur with Oak Creek's Distinguished Citizen Award. Victor stood up abruptly, his face contorted with fury, and pushed his way out of the pew toward the exit. Few even noticed his departure amid the continued applause. After the service, I was surrounded by well-wishers. Jessica approached, her eyes shining with pride. "Dad would have loved this," she said, embracing me tightly. "Yes, he would have," I agreed, feeling Rosalind's presence so strongly in that moment. "Victor's gone," Jessica added quietly. "He left during the mayor's announcement. He'd packed a suitcase this morning while I was in the shower." I squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry, Jessica." She shook her head. "Don't be. It's better this way. We'll sort things out later." Martin pushed through the crowd, his face alight with triumph. "Did you see his face? Worth every single minute of our plotting." As the church finally emptied, I found myself alone in the sanctuary, sitting in the choir loft where I had spent so many Sundays of my life. Pastor Evans joined me, settling into the seat beside mine. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there's a lesson in all of this that goes far beyond music." "What's that, Pastor?" "When someone tries to silence your voice, sometimes you discover that it's actually stronger than you ever realized." I smiled, thinking of the past few weeks, the humiliation, the struggle, and finally, the redemption. "I never thought I'd say this," I admitted, "but in a strange way, I'm grateful for what Victor did. He tried to label me as the worst voice in the choir, but instead, he helped me find my true voice." As I drove home that afternoon, the brilliant spring sunshine illuminated the familiar streets of Oak Creek, the town where I had taught generations of children, where I had loved and lost Rosalind, and where I had nearly lost myself. Victor had sought to diminish me, to erase me from the community that had always been my home. Instead, he had inadvertently pushed me toward a new and unexpected beginning. Tomorrow, I would start planning the new community music program. I would call Jessica and make sure she was truly okay. I would thank Martin properly for his unwavering, magnificent support. But today I would simply savor the music that still echoed in my heart, stronger and clearer than ever before. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.